welcome to our today's webcast about the updates on Azure hybrid infrastructure. So mainly today we are talking about Azure Local and Azure Arc, and we are covering a little bit the Windows Server 2025 as well. So all of you are mute today, so you're not able to ask questions over your mic, but over the chat window. So please use the chat window to ask your questions, and we try to answer all of them during our session or maybe at the end. So we are 3 people today, so we have 6 eyes that are able to watch a little bit what you are typing. So welcome to our today's session, and yeah, all of us, Manfred, Dino, and I, we are located in Germany. We are usually speaking German, so a lot of German people already know us, but we are a multinational webcast today. So let's start with a short introduction so that you know who we are. Let's start with Manfred. Manfred, who are you?
Yeah, hello, Sven. Hello to the audience. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the categories Cloud and Data Center and Azure. And this is exactly what is covered by Azure Local, because I came traditionally from the Windows Server part, so cloud and data center, and Azure Local is an operating system that runs on our servers, and Azure is relevant because we have the Azure Arc integration to use the Azure portal to manage the infrastructure on premises and to provide Azure, some of the Azure services on premises. So this is my passion, where I'm working all the time in Windows Server and Azure Local, and I'm providing a lot of trainings about Azure Local and hybrid infrastructure. So presentations, trainings, workshops, and I'm also supporting several partners. Maybe some of them are on the call in their implementations at the customers.
Yeah, you're going to run an Azure Local tour across Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and you will be in Amsterdam, correct, in May?
Yeah, this is correct. The tour starts in May. It starts in the 12th of May in Munich. I will put a link to the registration page to the chat window. This should be visible to the audience. And yeah, we continue in Stuttgart, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Berlin, and we will also be in Vienna and in Zurich. And in end of June, beginning of July, there will be a stop in Amsterdam. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, and you have been at the MVP Summit last week and together with Dino. So Dino,
yeah.
Let's switch to you. Who are you?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dino Bordonaro, and basically same as Manfred. I'm an MVP for Microsoft Most Valuable Professional for Cloud and Data Center Management and Azure. And like Manfred, I'm also coming from the Windows Server side. Then we jumped to Azure a bit for the Arc services. And now we are in the bridge in between, which is Azure Local, which is a Windows Server basement operating system, basically, with Azure Arc integration to Microsoft Azure, so the central place to manage your infrastructure. So long story short, I'm, as Manfred, in this business for a very long time, I think since over 20 years in IT now. And I have been one of the first people worldwide working on Microsoft Azure Stack, which came out in 2018. And from there on, we took the train to Azure Stack Hub, Azure Stack Edge, then Azure Stack HCI, and now Azure Local. So we have a lot of experience with real hardware, but as well with cloud-only stuff. And this is where Manfred and I, and as well Sven, have a lot of passion about, and we like to share these experiences basically and all our learning we had over the past couple of years in projects with our customers. And it's across the board from SMB customers to mid-market and enterprises as well. So I'm super happy to be here. Thank you, Sven and Manfred, for having me. And I hope we can give a lot of information and answer your questions while we're presenting and having this multinational webcast today.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that you are able to answer these questions because both of you are deep dive technical experts. I'm a little bit dumb in this space compared to you because I have never set up a server in my life. So all I know is very theoretical. That's why I'm not a technical resource. I'm a kind of business enablement resource at Microsoft. I'm driving the Azure Local sales support for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and Poland, and for whole EMEA region. I'm responsible for community building. So happy to be in this webcast today as well. So let's start with our topic about updates on Azure Local, Arc, and everything that has to do with Azure Hybrid. And well, it seems to be very long ago that there was the Microsoft Ignite, and Satya Nadella stood on stage and presented Azure Local. So I think this was the first time Satya Nadella talked about Azure Stack HCI, or now Azure Local, on the main stage. So this is pushing this solution a lot, and it demonstrates that Azure Local is something Microsoft really cares about. But Manfred, Dino, is Azure Local only a renaming of Azure Stack HCI, or is there more behind that story?
Manfred, you want? I want?
I can start if it's okay, and then you can continue, Dino.
Absolutely.
So what I was always telling when the new name came out, that the real new Azure Local world started in February 2024, when we had Azure Stack HCI 23H2. We had a lot of new things in the Azure Stack HCI ecosystem. We had a cloud-based deployment. We had real cloud services on premises. We had this real deep integration with Azure that was not available before. So the first 3 Azure Stack HCI versions had some correlation to Azure, but the deep integration, from my point of view, started with Azure Stack HCI 23H2. So from my point of view, it would have been perfect to have the renaming at the same time to show to the customers that here a new era started. So in November, when at Ignite the new name Azure Local was announced, we also had several new services, but the idea was still what started with Azure Stack HCI 23H2.
Dino, your comment?
Yeah, absolutely. It was basically, I mean, if you jump one day back, we are coming from where I know you guys already from Windows Server Software Defined. Then we had the situation that Azure Stack HCI was more or less a testing tool or framework. And then because we like to confuse people with names, Azure Stack HCI basically went out with real hardware, like certified hardware. And then since 23H2, which then is the next operating system after Manfred's end with 22H2, changed a lot of stuff because it was the first big release, 23H2, which was then deployed out of the Azure portal and brings you real Azure services like natively to the edge, but they are, to be fair, predefined. It's not everything you see in Azure that comes on-site, but 23H2 really feels like now a cloud operating system compared to what 22H2 was in the past. I've installed many systems in the past with PowerShell, like Manfred does as well, where we had all these steps optimized and we had best recipes from us with our experience and stuff. And this has been tested, worked out, blueprinted, and now we can install these systems certified out of the cloud with basic blueprints that fit your need. And if not, we even have a chance to manipulate these deployments and create them ourselves or tweak them and have custom deployments as well. So I'm super excited because my home is like standardization and as well blueprints. So this was the first time I was able to centrally basically provide scripting and guidance to customers who then had a much better success rate deploying stuff on themselves, which they would have need more Windows Server and S2D experience in the past until 22H2. Maybe Manfred can explain a little bit more what it also means to have a standardized deployment, which then leads you to better customer support from the technical side as they know what you're running, which is super awesome in my case, because in the past you spend a lot of time explaining hierarchy, network setups, and all that stuff, which is basically for some of these systems these days not needed if you run it out of the cloud portal with a standard deployment, which brings you then in problems where you need support and guidance into it's like a fast lane. They know what you have, and they know the parameters and all that stuff out of the Azure portal, and Microsoft and the OEMs, as well as we as MVPs or also consultants, are able to get up to speed in much faster time than we did with custom stuff that was done a bit different on each cluster with customers most of the time.
Yeah. So when I look at the Azure Local portfolio, it looks a little bit like the Azure Stack portfolio. So we had Azure Stack HCI, that's what we had in the middle. Then we had Azure Stack Edge, we had Azure Stack Hub. So it looks like we have all those three pillars again under the new umbrella of Azure Local. So what's missing so far is the final name of the left and right side. So maybe everything only will be Azure Local, and it's absolutely the same, or maybe there are three different types of technology and we will have some sub-brands. So it's interesting to see what's coming. So we see a lot of questions in the market. How can I test it? How can I get access? And so to be crystal clear, these are all previews. So some of them are private previews, so you do not have any access so far. Some of them are in a public preview. But yeah, I expect that we will have the low-cost, low-spec solution coming to GA, I think this summer. This is what I expect. So for the disconnected, I have no idea when it's really coming. But what we hear so far is that this is not a solution that is really something everyone can get. So it will have very limited use case scenarios because it's not so easy to provide this to customers. I'm not so deep dive into the technical details, but I think it's hard to bring in a disconnected environment the whole Azure Local experience, because this starts with the Azure control plane and all the Arc features. We will talk about Azure Arc a little bit later, and bring this from Azure to your on-premises infrastructure. So I'm really curious what the final solution will bring. I'm pretty sure that you have much more insights than I do, but you are all under NDA and you are not allowed to share these with the audience so far. But what we can share so far is a little bit more about the low spec, because there's more documentation. Manfred already posted a link, and there is a nice video. I can show some screenshots in a minute, but it looks like that Manfred wants to comment before
I wanted to comment mainly on the disconnected operations, because it was publicly announced at Ignite, and there were some additional informations at Ignite. So from my point of view, it's really fantastic that it will be possible somewhere in the future to have this control plane from Azure, or parts of the control plane on premises. So to imagine that something like this will be possible, and there was a slide in the presentation at Ignite where you could see how this will work, but with limited functionality. At Ignite, it was announced that in the first step there will be some limitations in the services compared to Azure Local Connected. The interesting thing is, when this information came out, many partners and customers asked me about this disconnected. And when I asked my question, so why would you use this and what is your scenario? Most of them had the situation that they said, okay, we will be sometime connected. So we will be sometimes connected to the internet, but we feel better if it's possible to have it disconnected. And there I always explained, this is not the idea of disconnected operations. Disconnected operations, the idea is that we are never connected. So we are really somewhere where no connectivity is possible, because if we have a connected scenario, and this is what I realized where many customers are afraid of. So the solution we currently have, the connected servers with Azure Local, there we don't have any outage of local virtual machines if the internet connectivity fails. So if we have an interruption in our internet connectivity for a few hours or a few days, for sure, hybrid services will not work any longer if I have some parts in Azure and some on premises. But virtual machines I have on premises, containers, Windows VMs, Linux VMs, all this keeps up and running. So I think it's important to explain that there's no reason to be to be afraid of this hybrid configuration. If there are outages, the workload will keep running even if there's no connectivity to the Azure portal. Today, it's defined that we need connectivity to Azure minimum once every 30 days. If we are realistic, we should ensure that we have a continuous connectivity to Azure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a relevant point, Manfred, because what I hear very often is that people are interested in Azure Local because they are looking for an alternative for VMware virtualization. And they heard that Microsoft's offer to have a strong hypervisor is Azure Local. And if we look back some years, this is exactly how we positioned it. We said, if you want to have the latest, greatest hypervisor from Microsoft on premises, go to Azure Local, and Windows Server will be the guest operating system. And in the meantime, we had some strange discussions about if Hyper-V is discontinued or not. And yeah, it is not. So Hyper-V is something we bet on in Windows Server, Azure Local, and Azure itself. And we brought all these cool Hyper-V features to Windows Server. So if a customer is really looking only for a strong hypervisor, but does not want connection to the Azure portal, in most of the scenarios, Windows Server is exactly what the customer should have a look at. But Dino, you want to comment something?
Yes, I want to comment something. So I just said it. I was working the last 3 years mainly in pre-sales, and Manfred as well. So what's very important to understand here, we are coming from an operating system where we brought virtualization, in this case Hyper-V, and then we've started building stuff on top. Azure Local is an operating system that does not go from the server management upwards. You should look at Azure Local from the Microsoft Azure perspective, bringing services down. So the biggest issue I hit with many proof of concepts I made is, so you guys, or not you guys, mainly basically the IT guy who is a nerd like me, Manfred, and is super interested in stuff, he wants to get hands-on. But to get hands-on, we see it in the chat already, how can we test it, the hardware? It's not about hardware. Basically, it all starts with your scenario, which is use cases. So the biggest thing is you need to understand your own infrastructure, and you need to re-ask questions, because we do it because it always was that way, is not something you should consider for such a modern platform. So long story short, I can only give you the advice to get a consultant, like in this case here, just call Manfred and me on site, and then work out the use cases, the ones you need, prioritize them, and also put some, let's say, KPIs in it. Like, we need to get VMware replaced, and as well in next step Citrix. And then we need to find the use cases and services we need. And this is where Manfred and I come into play, because we don't only know Azure Local, we know also different stuff, as well as GDPR knowledge and other process knowledge for certification, which, for example, in car manufacturing is TSAX and other stuff. So we work with you on basically on your requirements and use cases, and then we come up with how would we build it. This is not the first question, it's the last one, basically, after we have use cases. And it makes a lot of sense to then jump to the prerequisites for such a deployment, and then get hardware on site. Because if you get the hardware on site first, then we are so much under time pressure when you need to return it in like 4, 8, or 12 weeks. So to get the best out of your proof of concept, work on your use cases, prioritize them, talk with an expert, the Microsoft people, us as external consultants, whoever, and bring up a plan how your future landscape should look like. It's not about having lift and shift and cut over weekend and everything is done. This is basically, first of all, as an assessment. In our case here with Azure Local, we have the Azure Migrate capabilities with an appliance as well. So we first look, what are your workloads? How are they sized? What do we need to make a sizing for hardware as well later? Which VMs are there today? Which ones are replaced? Do we have other requirements, like we want in the future some more space and resources for testing, for example, and quality assurance. So all this stuff comes into the game here. And once we have it and we have the prerequisites done in Azure, checked connectivity, talked about firewall, brought maybe your IT security guys in to make them feel comfortable as well with the communication that goes outside to Microsoft. All this can be done without having hardware on site. And then when we order hardware with whoever you want to work with, then we have after the deployment, all time for this proof of concept focused on the use cases and testing them out, compared to we lose 2/3 of the whole proof of concept on questions and unclear use cases and unclear communication settings. The guy who gives us admin rights for the Azure tenant is on holidays for 2 weeks, we can't get them, and things like this. So this is all about use cases, and then look from top down. We have this big tool set, Microsoft Azure, and then we climb down until we end on an operating system. And then, of course, Arc, which is the technology behind that connects hardware to the cloud. And in some cases, maybe Windows Server 2025 is a good fit for you as well. So that's why I say there should be a workshop or an expert individually who can, in your case, then assess what you have, then also find a way to migrate and then to transform your current model of operation to the future model of operation, and then go there in steps by steps to take you and your team with you. And the only thing which is super important, that somehow the idea we had at the beginning comes to life, because we built basically the strong basement to put your skyscraper on. So once the basement is there, you can just put a tent on it. Doesn't matter. But if you put the skyscraper on, it's still big enough and strong enough to also cover all your future use cases from this picture. So for me, it's just important. It's all about use cases, and all these proof of concepts that went not that great. It was about, we need person X, Y, Z, and we have no idea what we need to provide the platform of tomorrow for them. So this is very, very important. It's all about use cases, and then you have many technology flavors in our portfolio here, or even hybrid modes. Put some stuff in public Azure and then run some stuff locally, like VDI with really accelerated stuff and things like this. So that's what we are here for. Sven, Manfred, Carsten, Raffan, and the others, we are specialized in this. Utilize us, come to us, join our meetings, whatever, or even come to us as a consultant, and we do a consulting service for you on site, remote, wherever you are. And then it's much easier because we translate the complexity of Azure to your requirements, and that makes it super smooth from my experience. And these proof of concept also feel great because everyone was aligned to what we're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely, Dino. So it's important to understand that we have a broad range of solutions, and some fit more or less to your needs. And it's very important to understand how these solutions look like, and then understand what's better for your individual environment. So some weeks ago, I had a webcast about the Azure Local versus Windows Server 2025. And if you have missed that, you can go to YouTube, look after the Azure Local Tech Talk channel, and then you will find on the video this recording. So it's very important to understand the positioning of these both solutions. So in a nutshell, I would say Windows Server is your solution if you want to customize it, if you want to have an individual solution that fits perfectly to your needs. If you want to have something that is standardized, that is easy to scale. So we are at the edge. We are talking about thousands of stores and sites. It does not make sense to customize and to have a lot of individuals working on site on these solutions, and maybe they are looking completely different side to side. If you want to scale, it's important to standardize, and this is where Azure Local is perfectly made for. And yeah, I've gone through that in that session. And again, we brought a lot of features to Windows Server 2025. Like stretch clustering will come to that platform as well. And we had a question in the chat about stretch clustering. So how does the future look like for Windows Server, for Azure Local? Is there any roadmap? Do you know when it will come?
Maybe before we start, we can ask a short question to our audience. For me, it would be interesting to hear what distances you need for this topic that we opened with stretch clustering. So if you could write into the chat 0 if you don't need stretch cluster, or the amount of meters or kilometers you need, then we can see if we have the right answer for your question. So 0 is you don't need any distance between the nodes, so they are mainly in the same room or maybe in the same building, or you have some meters or kilometers. Okay, yeah. Okay. We see the answers are very, very different. It starts from 0. We have many in the area of meters, which is fine, because I would say there we have a answer for this meter option. We have some that are in the range of several hundred kilometers, and there it's maybe a little bit different. Okay, yeah. So I think we can tell something about the new solution for this, let's say, cluster with some distance, but we cannot say anything about the timeline, I think so, Dino. Or?
I mean, we all have always the hope at Microsoft Ignite, which is in November. We see things like this because usually Microsoft targets a lot of stuff, and I can't wait because there are many things in the building, and let's see if they make it until Ignite. So this year's Ignite should be awesome from all the new stuff and changes that we are probably expecting that would happen. And I would also really hope that at latest, this is a thing for Ignite in November. Don't know if you agree, Manfred, but I think there was a lot of progress.
Yeah, but to be honest, we expected this last year's Ignite.
Yeah.
Clustering will come back to Azure Local, and a lot of people are, well, not so happy that it did not come.
Yeah, maybe to explain.
Any idea why it's no longer part of Azure Local and why we changed the strategy on that?
I don't have an official answer for this. I don't know if this is the Microsoft answer, but it's my answer why things have changed. The stretch cluster in Azure Stack HCI 2022 H2 and before. So before we had the release of 23 H2 where this was removed, we had a combination of storage spaces direct and storage replica. These are two different technologies. So traditionally, if we have a hyper-converged infrastructure with a storage spaces direct pool, we have one pool in the cluster and we can create different volumes. And the important thing for this pool is that we have low latency and high bandwidth. This means that we cannot handle so wide ranges and distances. This is the reason why Microsoft implemented the storage replica for the huger distances. And storage replica is available in the synchronous and asynchronous model, but storage replica was developed when hard disks were still state of the art in Windows Server 2016. And from my point of view, in the first versions where storage replica was used for the stretch cluster, for many customers, this was fine. But in the today situation where we have mainly systems with NVMe only, and where we have different expectations regarding the IOs and the throughput, the storage replica technology was a limiter there, where we could not handle this high demands in throughput and IOs. And from my point of view, this was the reason why Microsoft said we have to redesign this, and we will not use any longer the storage replica, but we will change the storage spaces direct in this situation, so that the rack-aware cluster, which is exactly what is part of the article you are showing, Sven, what is then possible with the rack-aware cluster, where we cannot handle these distances with 100 kilometers and more. We had some answers, but the situations where there are distances with a few meters or a few hundred meters, this new rack-aware cluster solution has the big advantage that we can realize much higher I/O and throughput than it was possible with the storage replica combination we had before.
Mm-hmm. And it's all about latency, right? So to give the number, it's like up to 5 milliseconds. Correct me if that's not the right number anymore, Manfred, because there was a lot of stuff ongoing. So from my side, we had also the issue with storage replica and stuff that for the IT people, really using this hardware and software solution combined on 2 or 3 or more sites, they had more things to configure or do in the application landscape to get them high available. The beauty here is from what regular cluster is basically that you don't have any extra setups. So if one site goes down, the VM is like you're losing a host in today's world. The VM just goes to a different node and just powers up again and is there in an ideal world. So there's no need for you to think about application layer high availability, where you would need like load balancer pairs in front of it and then route the traffic with some checks to left or right. This thing here really has the beauty. You can use both sides for production workloads. So it's not one side is active and the other one is passive waiting for fail. You can mix it and it's super easy. And at the same way, you can then also make maintenance over the day, because you easily can live migrate the VMs from one side to the other and bring the nodes on one side in maintenance while you're still up, which would be much more work in a storage replica and scenario than it was before. So this is the thing that fits most for many customers, and we called it all the time, basically, Manfred, the campus cluster. And some of you guys also know the Carsten cluster, which is named on Carsten Raffal, was also talked a lot about these stuff with Manfred together. And yeah, it gets much easier, not only for you, basically also for support. I'm always pointing back to support, because it's very important that everyone is aware what you're running to then get it fixed faster and have the right action plan. And I also can't wait. It's awesome that we have this back sometime soon, like Microsoft soon. When it works, it will be there.
Yeah.
So Christian assumes that it has to do with the Arc resource bridge. If this is really a technical issue, then the question could be, will we be able to bring the old stretch cluster to Windows Server?
From the technical
bridge is not needed.
From the technical perspective, it would be possible, but with the technology we have today, we have the limitation, and this is what I was talking about, that we don't have RDMA support for the storage replica, and this limits us very much in the possible throughput and things we are doing. That there puts a lot of CPU load there, but maybe there could be changes to the storage replica thing. So storage replica is part of Windows Server. So it would be possible to build something we had here with the stretch cluster in Azure Stack HCI before. But as far as I know, today this is not supported to build a cluster where we have inside this cluster storage replica. So the technology is in Windows Server, but it was never supported in this combination there.
Okay. Yeah, and to be honest, so at the beginning of Azure Stack HCI, I had a lot of questions about stretch cluster and a lot of demand, but I do not see this demand any longer in the same way as it was before. And when I look at a worldwide perspective, it looks like that the stretch cluster is more a regional demand. It's not the same in the whole world. What I see today is that people are looking for a real edge solution that is scalable. We're talking about hundreds or thousands of sites. So the issue that has to be solved is to have an easy deployment to reduce the need of IT specialists on site and so on. And that's where the video I already talked about comes on the table. So if you look at YouTube and look for Azure Local with low-cost hardware, you will find this 9-minute video. And I like this very much because it describes how easy it could be to deploy Azure Local in sites where you do not have on-site experts. So all you need is someone with very limited IT skills, like in this scenario where Cosmos Darwin unpacked two small servers and connected it with a switch. And all he's doing then is to boot from a prepared USB stick. And he's doing this with all the nodes, and then he's leaving the site. This is all he has to do on site. And then you take over from the headquarter or somewhere in the world, and you prepare your site, the new site, you provision the machines, and then you go into the deployment. And then you are able to deploy these easily connected nodes to the individual Azure tenant. And the rest is done by the cloud wizard. And this makes deployment much, much easier than in the past, where you needed all the experts on site. You prepare your cluster with Azure Stack HCI on site, and then you connect it with Azure. And in the meantime, you can have make a lot of mistakes and so on. And now everything is automated. It's standardized and doable through the Azure portal. And one good thing is that you do not need Active Directory any longer. So how do you think about that new feature?
Manfred, I guess this would be awesome if you could answer. You're muted.
Yeah, I was muted because I was typing to answer some questions in the chat, and there was exactly one about this Active Directory thing. Yeah, what Sven currently has in the screenshot, the local identity is for those that don't want to run an infrastructure domain for the physical nodes. The infrastructure domain is still possible, so it's not the situation that we cannot use a Active Directory domain anymore, but the misunderstanding at many customers was that we have one domain where we join everything, and this often causes issues. This is the reason why Azure Local creates within the deployment an own organization unit in the Active Directory where the group policy inheritance is blocked. This works if you don't have any enforced policies, so you still have to be careful about this. But the recommendation always is to have a dedicated infrastructure domain to separate the user workload from the infrastructure. If you don't want to have this infrastructure domain, it's possible with the local identities. When Sven came up with this question, I was just checking about the status of it. So as far as I know, the local identities is in public preview. So it should be public preview available, but it's not released. So not for production, but it's in public preview. This was the question what we had in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, the question in the chat was, is it still in private preview? So Carl said, yes, it is. You say it's in a public preview, so you can use it.
I will look this up.
Okay. And the other question is this something we will only have with the low-cost hardware? And I think the answer is no. This will be an option for Azure Local all up.
Just one additional comment. I mean, Manfred talked about this a couple of years already. So some of you guys probably are aware about autopilot in the Microsoft 365 world. So basically, this is what Sven was guiding to. We have if someone used the Azure Stack Edge appliance in the past, it was the same way basically. So we know that hardware is coming to your site. So we have basically an identifier for this. And once the hardware comes up, it then goes to Microsoft, says, hello, I'm online. That's my ID. And then everything else is on an action plan already, which gets deployed over the USB stick, which saves a lot of work. So basically, Manfred, I don't know if you would agree, but you can call it basically autopilot for Azure Local from the idea behind this to pre-configure systems before they are shipped. And then once they come online, they already know where they are, who they are, and how they should get configured.
So from the workflow, when we look at what happens, there are a lot of steps that could be automated there. So when we think about the onboarding, where we are asked about the subscription ID, the tenant ID, the resource group, and things like this. So what I mentioned a long time ago in one of our calls, that my let's say expectation for the future is that the steps are reduced to a minimum where maybe the system is already known when I order the system, and I have a pre-configuration where everything is done via this Arc enablement, because from the technical perspective is possible. We see this when we use the Arc onboarding wizard on Windows Server. The Arc onboarding wizard on Windows Server is, from my point of view, much easier than the Arc onboarding for Azure Local. But in the release 2503 of Azure Local, that was released 2 or 3 days ago, we have this new onboarding app that is now, let's say, more in the way how Windows Server does it. So we can see Microsoft optimizes this thing. My vision for the future is that is really a one-click thing, because what you mentioned, Dino, that it's maybe not about hardware, but about the solution and the use cases. I think that in the future we care less about the hardware. We just have the box and do a click and everything is deployed automatically there. But this is my vision. I don't know if we will get this. Yeah.
But what is already there today, just to mention it, so once we have an idea what we're installing and we're ready to scale it out to our remote and other locations, we can go to the Azure portal and we can install the first system. And as it's Azure, it's all triggered in the background by the Arc Resource Manager. So long story short, if you have a cluster which is up and running and it's the same way because of what you need, right? So basically we take the blueprint that I mentioned, we customize what should be different for you. We can also automate other stuff on top, like enabling patch and updates, like the inventory tracking, like a Azure Monitor site, and all that stuff can then be made in ARM basically. Once this one cluster is there, we know the others are the same, you can export the ARM configuration of this and then trigger the automated install from a blueprint of an existing system. Basically, we clone it to the other systems. So we just use maybe the Azure Local wizard once after we have all the settings and prerequisites we need. And like Manfred just said, then we get all the stuff it's basically a parameter JSON file and the ARM template, which is the automation behind this. So again, can easily, with a couple of clicks, clone this setup on site A to site B and site C. And with the same kind of automation, when you have changes, you can roll it out to your whole fleet, because fleet management is also a functionality in Azure, in the Azure portal, which is still in preview, I think, Manfred, right? It's not there yet. Only in US East you can use it, yeah. So, but this is basically what we're going to, like one single pane of glass, which is the Azure portal, to then also see all your sites and clusters and manage them centrally, and also roll out updates and stuff that you need to define, like Defender for cloud policies, or in general Azure policies as well, to keep your to prevent configuration drift in your environment, basically.
No. Yeah, I did some trainings this week to partners, and the interesting thing is that still after so many years, most of our partners and customers are not aware of Azure Arc and the role of Azure Arc and what it really is and what benefits this brings to Windows Server and Azure Local. So maybe we should talk a little bit about Azure Arc. So for an introduction, it's important to understand that Azure Arc is an agent you can install in your virtual machines, for example, Windows, Linux, or you can Arc enable databases like SQL, and you connect all the infrastructure that is outside of Azure with Azure. And that brings two benefits. So one is you have visibility of your non-Azure infrastructure in the Azure portal. And the other benefit is that you can bring Azure services outside of Azure. And for Azure Local, this is mandatory. So Azure Local is connected to Azure and it's integrated into Azure Arc. For Windows Server, you can have all those benefits as well, but you have to enable them, and many of them you have to pay for. The good thing for Azure Arc is, and this is relevant when we're talking about licensing, that Azure Arc, Azure Local is like an Azure dedicated host, but outside of Azure. So this means if you have a service that is running on Azure and it comes for free on Azure, like Azure Update Manager, hot patching, extended security updates, they come without additional cost to Azure Local as well. This is one of the benefits I see for Azure Local, but you can have all those features on Windows Server, for example, as well. But you have to pay for them. And on this page, you can see on the left side the range of Azure services that are coming to your on-premises infrastructure through Azure Arc. And you can see what you get when you use Azure Arc in the middle. So the green, blue, and red dots. And when you have Windows Server license plus software assurance or a subscription, you have the dots on the right side. So a lot of more features coming to customers with software assurance. But some of them you have to pay for. And on Azure Local, additional ones are for free. So like already explained, extended security updates, hot patching, and these things. So what is your experience, Manfred and Dino? Why do partners and customers have so often no idea what Azure Arc is? Because Azure Arc, from my perspective, is solving a lot of problems. And we are talking a lot about it. But still, the channel does not know what Azure Arc is. So what's the reason for that?
I would say from my experience that there's a big third-party placement from software companies helping you manage software on site, basically. And also the control panel is then on site, or some are even in the cloud. What I'm just pointing out is SolarWinds and stuff for monitoring and automation. So there's a big market behind a lot of bigger companies to manage your fleet from the patch update and policy perspective, as well as security stuff and governance stuff, whatever, like keeping an inventory right now or make change tracking, which is interesting. So Azure Arc is basically, and you mentioned it, this is just from the concept side to mention it again. Azure Arc, I always paint the picture in my customer set is like a long patch cable that you can attach everywhere of your outside locations and bring everything up to Azure. And this is nothing we had in the past. It wasn't there before. This is why no one knew it. But just to make it pretty clear, it doesn't matter if this operating system is Linux or Windows for the Arc agent, because we have clients for both. It doesn't matter if you run them on your data center locally or if you run it on VMware, on top of VMs hosted by VMware, and as well as Google Cloud, Alibaba Cloud, AWS Cloud, whatever. So Arc is basically the tool which is needed to attach everything outside Azure as much as possible to inside Azure to then keep your policy, governance, compliance all on a defined state and also monitor this. And basically people see it and love it, but the name is not out there, which is mainly a reason in my experience. Manfred, correct me if that's wrong, but it costs money for them as of today. In the past, the System Center suite was very expensive to license, buy, and maintain, and you need a lot of knowledge to run it yourself, basically. Azure Arc is just a couple of mouse click, and it's installed, it's there, centralized managed, and a lot of extensions available to even then bring more stuff outside Azure inside your world. Even like there's a resource bridge based on Arc for VMware. So even if you have VMware up and running, you can then bring your VMs to Azure, like from the benefits by VMware connected to Microsoft up to the VM guests like Windows VM or Linux VM to patch and update, monitoring like is there a critical update there which is running on my infrastructure somewhere. So basically my biggest point really is prevent shadow IT. We want to have all devices as much as possible for the visibility in Azure, their configuration, their security state, and then make security in Azure and push it down to the whole fleet. Why? Which was different before with your private data center, where there was no possibility to do things like this. And if you would buy System Center, there would be extra costs one time to buy licenses, the support contract in the background, and you need to have skilled people. This is now all taken off as a service that Microsoft provides, which removes so much complexity on one hand, and on the other side, which gives you a lot of speed to onboard your devices wherever they are in scale easily and scripted and automated in the background. So long story short, it was license cost and knowledge needed in the past to bring everything to Microsoft side to make them centralized managed and monitored. And now you have it one level up in public Azure, where you can just push it down to your fleet, which then costs money for sure, like the update manager thing for VMs which are not hosted on Azure Local. But this is why we have Azure Local, because you can use so much cool stuff without any additional costs on top. And I think I even forgot a couple of stuff, but Manfred will probably point it out now.
No, absolutely agree here. I think customers are afraid that there could be costs behind Azure Arc, but this is not the situation. Azure Arc itself, it's for free. So I always recommend to try it out. Additional services do not cost anything extra, but for sure, they get not free via Azure Arc. And what it's important to understand that there are different levels of Arc integration. This is exactly what we can see here on the slide of Sven, from Sven. And from my point of view, the deepest integration with Azure Arc is in Azure Local, because there we have additionally the Arc resource bridge, which gives us a lot of additional capabilities. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So I like Azure Local very much, and one of the reasons is that, for example, we brought Azure Kubernetes services to Azure Local without additional cost. And when I talk to customers, at the end, it's all about how much do I have to pay. When you explain the options and when you explain that most Arc services are included, and when you say Azure Kubernetes services is coming without additional cost, they say, okay, then it's a no-brainer. Then it looks like that Azure Local is exactly what I want from technical perspective, from strategy, and from cost perspective. So maybe it's not where it should be from every single nitty-gritty technical detail, but we see a lot of things coming very quickly. But all up, it looks like that this is really a solution everyone can bet on for the future, and that makes a lot of fun and sense. And especially as people or customers are looking for alternatives from VMware. And this is where Microsoft helps you to migrate, because this is something customers need very often, a first-party solution to do that. Yesterday in a training, I heard that they are running into some issues when they are using this migration solution. So first of all, it's in a preview. It's not really final and released, but what are your experiences? Have you tried it? And do you think it's more or less really ready? And at the same time, please give some comments on the hydration functionality, because a lot of people asked about hydration in the chat.
Yeah, we have minimum one customer in the call that migrated a lot of virtual machines with Azure Migrate from VMware to Azure Local. It was very successful. And Azure Local does something that was called in the Azure Migrate for Azure Local does something that was called in the chat hydration. Hydration was announced with this name at the last Ignite in Chicago. As far as I know, there is no update on the roadmap. There was a roadmap shown in the presentation at Ignite last year that said that we should have the hydration feature that allows to bring existing virtual machines fully visible into the Azure Local environment somewhere this year. But I don't have any news about this when it will be available finally. But regarding the Azure Migrate from VMware to Azure Local, the experience is very good. So the question is, what specific issues the customers or partners from yesterday have seen with the Migrate for Azure Local?
I would like to add one sentence before, which I already mentioned earlier. So the Migrate appliance is also the assessment tool, right? So in my when I do a project with customers, I always at some point install the Migrate appliance and we assess basically what they have. So in this case here with VMware, you have a functionality to connect to your vSphere server and then basically read all the meters out of the VMs and whatever. So from a perspective on sizing also and cost prediction when we scale out and have an idea what we need from the hardware perspective in case of processor cores, memory, and hard drive, then it makes a lot of sense to keep this appliance even running for like 30 days, to have all your peaks in there. Like many customers once a month send invoices and batch jobs out where they need more performance, and then for the rest of the month they don't need it maybe. So long story short, the migrate appliance is installed on the local hardware, connected to, if you want to, on your own Azure subscription. And then we get out basically after couple of clicks an Excel file, which first of all shows you all your inventory. It shows you what the VM has today in case, in a sense of CPU cores and memory, and then what was assessed. So it basically can be you have a VM which has like 16 cores and it has 32 gigabyte of memory. But as we get out the meters of the vCenter and we see the real utilization that these VMs consumed over a time frame, like 30 days, then you could say you have 16 cores and 32 gigabyte of RAM. But from what we have tracked here, 4 cores are enough and like 8 gigabytes of memory. So this is an awesome place to really get your hands on before you buy and order anything, to learn what your infrastructure is configured today and what the assessment gave you as an optimization. And at the same time, it shows you what would be the cost to completely migrate them off to public Azure, and what is then needed on the Azure Local side to make cool shopping cart sized S, M, and L clusters. If you, for example, have bigger customers on bigger side, then you have a 2-node cluster on whatever mid-market size, and then even single node clusters would be okay to just connect some edge location to the solution. So long story short, it's a great weapon to understand what hardware size you need in the background and learn about your VMs and their readiness to migrate Linux and Windows, where it says like everything is already there. This VM 100% for sure is migratable. And there are others which have a warning sign. It shows you can't basically you can migrate, but there could be a problem with X, Y, Z. So long story short, migrate is a great place to start your sizing basically and your migration readiness before you actually start to think about new hardware. This basically gives you a complete footprint in Excel what you need, and then we can take it from there and then start sizing different clusters, or just one size fits them all for you. It's all about strategy and planning. This is different from the projects in the past, right? So we spend a lot of time planning it out. And once you planned it, then we have a lot of speed because we standardized and just run and do what we found out and investigated in the past, basically. And that's awesome because it's free of cost for sure. And also one comment on the appliance itself for the migration from VMware. I know there's Darren in here as well. So we are also aware of the problems we have in our test labs, which is like the ISO file stays mounted in and brings problems. So that's also your benefit working with us MVPs, because we have a direct fast track line to the product engineering groups and make sure once this gets GA, these nasty little errors are not there anymore, basically. And we run a lot, Manfred runs a lot of hardware, and I'm for myself as well in our demo labs to play around with things like these. And for what the price is free, what it does, it's just awesome. And it's the only tool as of today who converts these VMs into an Arc VM and not in a Hyper-V VM, because right now it's easy to also use a third-party tool like Veeam, but then you have Hyper-V VMs. You can't easily convert them and make them visible on the Azure side as of today, because this tool, or basically the functionality we call hydration, is not available now. And hydration basically is take a local VM, which is only known in that one cluster or one hypervisor, Hyper-V, then convert it into an Arc VM, like wrap it around and make it visible to public Azure. That's not automated these days, but it's coming for sure, I would bet, this year. And once this is there, it makes it so much easier to also use third-party tools than to migrate, like Veeam Backup and Replication, Commvault, and all these other solutions, which for today, you can back up an Arc VM, but you need to be aware of when you restore, it doesn't come back as an Arc VM if the original VM is not there anymore. If you already have an original VM still up and running, you can override. But if it's a migrated VM, which is just living on your local Hyper-V, we can't easily make automated stuff and bring it as an Arc VM back, or basically not even, this can't be done after restores. It needs to be done at the restore to register it with the local resource bridge and then push it up to Azure. So I talked a lot. I'm just saying, if you have use cases where you directly want to migrate from VMware in that case, or whatever source, to a Azure Local VM connected by Arc to public Azure, Azure Migrate is your one-stop tool as of today, which is capable of doing this. For all the other hardware software vendors and ISVs, we need the hydration feature, and yeah, we all here wish it would be already there a year ago, but they hit some issues and we have no final date when this is available as of today, unfortunately. But keep assured.
Cool. So we are at the end of the hour, and I like this session very much because I've seen a lot of chat activity, and the good thing is that you answer the questions of the other attendees. So it's a very interactive session, and I like that very much. Unfortunately, we had not so much to share so far because some of the things we expected to be available have been postponed or not announced yet. So let's have this kind of session on a regular basis. So next time when we really have a lot of things we can talk about, let's do it again. But in the meantime, I invite all of you to follow us on LinkedIn. So go to Azure Local Tech Talk on LinkedIn. This is a community for you, for all those who are interested in Azure Local, Azure Hybrid. A lot of experts are already joining this community. We are around about 2,500 people so far. So this community is for sharing news, for sharing best practices, insights, and for asking questions as well. And on this screen, you can see that my colleague Neil Bird, for example, and some other colleagues created documentation about best practices, how to do things. And well, if you have any issues, please come to us, ask us, go to the Azure Local Tech Talk community, write your questions into the chat windows in LinkedIn, or post your best practices. You are more than welcome to do that. And again, when we have some news to share, relevant news, we will set up a second session. But for today, we are at the end. Thank you so much for your time, Manfred, Dino, and all the guests. This session has been recorded, so if you registered, you can rewatch, or maybe your colleagues can watch it if they were not able to join live. So I would like to say thank you. Have a nice weekend and see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.